We're going to be in Genesis chapter 18 this morning. Genesis chapter 18. The story of Sodom and Gomorrah. Great kids emphasis. I was talking with some of our elders this week about how eager I am to preach normal sermons when we get to Hebrews, and Jim very insightfully said, "You picked it," which is fair, very fair. But we are in Genesis 18 and 19. So just kind of setting the stage, how we got to here. God has made promises to Abraham that he would bless him, that he would have a son, that nations would come from him. But as time has passed on, the son has not come, the son has not come, the son has not come. Yet God has continued reaffirming these promises to him over and over and over again. And the start of our text, Abraham is going to run into some men / angels / God himself that are coming to visit him. And finally, the day is coming. The child is going to be born in the next year. But then that conversation transitions into another conversation where we will spend most of our time. Let's start by reading the first part of Genesis chapter 18. The Lord appeared to Abraham near the great trees of Mamre while he was sitting at the entrance to his tent in the heat of the day. Abraham looked up and saw 3 men standing nearby. When he saw them, he hurried from the entrance of his tent to meet them and bowed low to the ground. All right, so these 3 men come to Abraham. He said, "If I have found favor in your eyes, my Lord, do not pass your servant by. Let a little water be brought, and then you may all wash your feet and rest under this tree. Let me get you something to eat so you can be refreshed and then go on your way, now that you have come to your servant." "Very well," they answered, "do as you say." So Abraham hurried into the tent to Sarah. He is 99 years old, so I don't know what hurried means exactly, but he hurries into the tent. "Quick," he said. And she's 85, so I don't know what quick means there either. He said, "Get 3 seahs of the finest flour, knead it, and bake some bread." Then he ran to the herd and selected a choice tender calf and gave it to a servant who hurried to prepare it. He then brought some curds and milk and the calf that had been prepared and set these before them. While they ate, he stood near them under a tree. So these 3 men come, and Abraham is eager in his hospitality towards them. He is wanting to welcome them, wanting to provide for their needs. So we see some generosity in Abraham. We don't know here. Does Abraham know exactly who these men are at this point? He's going to know at some point. We don't know when he has that realization, but he welcomes them. Verse number 9, "Where is your wife Sarah?" they asked him. "There in the tent," he said. Then one of them said, "I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, will have a son." Now Sarah was listening at the entrance to the tent, which was behind him. Abraham and Sarah were already very old, and Sarah was past the age of childbearing. So Sarah laughed to herself as she thought, "After I am worn out and my Lord is old, will I now have this pleasure?" Sarah responds similarly to Abraham in the previous chapter. When Abraham is told about this, he laughs, but that laughing is followed by falling on his face in worship. So it seems like that laughing has somewhat of a positive connotation. That's a celebratory laughing. Here, Sarah is going to be kind of called out on her laughing. So, we all know that there's differences in how we laugh. You can laugh at someone, you can laugh with someone, or you can laugh at someone and say that you're laughing with them so you don't feel as guilty about laughing at them. And here, in this case, Sarah is laughing, apparently not in a celebratory way, but in a doubtful way. Genesis 18, verse 13, we continue the story. Then the Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh and say, 'Will I really have a child now that I am old?'" When God asks questions, he usually knows the answer to those questions. And by usually, I mean all the time, because he knows everything. And in this case, I think anyone would know why Sarah would laugh when she is told she's going to have a baby at the ripe old age of 85. Is anything too hard for the Lord? "I will return to you at the appointed time next year. Sarah will have a son." Sarah was afraid, so she lied and said, "I did not laugh," but He said, yes, you did laugh. And so Sarah, again, another reason why we might think this laugh is not the positive celebratory laugh of Abraham, she lied about the fact that she laughed. Don't lie to God. It's a bad choice. Never lie to people. Well, don't lie at all, but especially don't lie to people who know literally everything. And Sarah lies, but God simply affirms, yes, you did laugh. And so we have this exciting story, this almost like a gender reveal party thing going on with Abraham, Sarah, and the three men, this birth announcement. It's exciting. So we would think that this is the introduction to an account of great joy and celebration. If you think that, you haven't read much of the book of Genesis or any of the Old Testament, because it's going to take a turn for darkness here. We have seen in the book of Genesis revealed over and over the grace and judgment of God. That He is both a gracious, good, loving God, but also a righteous, just, judging God. And what the book of Genesis does is for the people of Israel who are in the wilderness wandering, the recipients of this book, it's reminding them, you have a generous, benevolent, good God. And He expects obedience from you. And He judges unrighteousness. And Israel needs that message in the wilderness. They need to be reminded of the goodness of God, that God is a God worth obeying because He is generous and merciful and kind. But they also need to be reminded of the justice of God, that He is a God who deserves to be obeyed because He is holy and righteous. And so, in this account, we're going to see those two twin ideas united together again. The goodness and righteousness of God coexist with one another. And in our text for today, as we go through the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, we're going to see three different characters or groups of people who respond very differently to our good but righteous judging God. First of all, we're going to look at Abraham. Abraham's response to the justice of the Lord is Abraham calls out for the Lord's mercy. Verse number 16 through 33. When the men got up to leave, they looked down toward Sodom, and Abraham walked along with them to see them on their way. Then the Lord said, "Shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do? Abraham will surely become a great and powerful nation, and all nations on earth will be blessed through him." We've heard that before, like 5 times before this. "For I have chosen him, so that he will direct his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing what is right and just, so that the Lord will bring about for Abraham what he has promised him." Then the Lord said, "The outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is so great, their sin so grievous, that I will go down and see if what they have done is as bad as the outcry that has reached me. If not, I will know." The men turned away and went toward Sodom, but Abraham remained standing before the Lord. Then Abraham approached him and said, "Will you sweep away the righteous with the wicked? What if there are 50 righteous people in the city? Will you really sweep it away and not spare the place for the sake of 50 righteous people in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to kill the righteous with the wicked, treating the righteous and the wicked alike. Far be it from you, will not the judge of all the earth do right?" The Lord said, "If I find 50 righteous people in the city of Sodom, I will spare the whole place for their sake." Then Abraham spoke up again, "Now that I have been so bold as to speak to the Lord, though I am nothing but dust and ashes, what if the number of the righteous is 5 less than 50? Will you destroy the whole city for the lack of 5 people? If I find 45 there," he said, "I will not destroy it." Once again, he spoke to him, "What if only 40 are found there?" He said, "For the sake of 40, I will not do it." Then he said, "May the Lord not be angry, but let me speak. What if only 30 can be found there?" He answered, "I will not do it if I find 30 there." Abraham said, "Now that I have been so bold to speak to the Lord, what if only 20 can be found there?" He said, "For the sake of 20, I will not destroy it." Then he said, "May the Lord not be angry, but let me speak just once more. What if only 10 can be found there?" He answered, "For the sake of 10, I will not destroy it." When the Lord had finished speaking with Abraham, he left, and Abraham returned home. So Abraham's response to hearing about the judgment of God is to plead with God for mercy, to plead with the Lord for mercy. The men leave, and he is left simply with the Lord. So it seems like the angels are the two other men, that these are angels, not the angel of the Lord, but angels, and that the third person is Yahweh himself, the Lord, probably, I think, Jesus in a pre-incarnate appearance. And as the men leave, the Lord considers with himself whether he should tell Abraham what's about to happen. And he determines to do so because Abraham is the one who's received the promise, and because Abraham is a righteous man who will do what is right. And so he tells Abraham about what's happening in Sodom. The outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great. So whatever is going on in Sodom, Abraham probably has some inkling. His nephew is over there after all. Whatever is going on in Sodom, there is an outcry going up to God because of the actions of the people of Sodom. They are evil, and they are mistreating other people. And so this cry goes to God. He hears it, and he is going to do something about it. It says he's going to go down and see if what they have done is as bad as the outcry that has reached him. The same idea is presented at the Tower of Babel, where God hears what's happening and is coming down. This is what we call an anthropomorphism, where God takes a human form. Does God actually need to travel to see what's going on in the world? No. But in expressing it to Abraham, he is giving a humanity and a sense to who he is. He's traveling to see what is happening, and Abraham is grieved. Abraham hears that God is going to judge. He does not appeal to God that he not judge. Abraham, when he hears of the coming judgment of God, recognizes that it is right for God to judge. It is righteous for a holy God to deal with sin. And so Abraham doesn't cry, oh God, that's not fair. They're not that bad. Can't you just turn the other way? Can't you just ignore it? Can't you just give him more time? Abraham does not do that. He sees the coming judgment of God. He acknowledges that it is good, but he calls out for God to have mercy based not on violating his character and not being righteous, but based on his character, which is merciful and righteous. And so he says, God, will you condemn the unjust with the just? Will you judge those who are righteous with the unrighteous? There's going to be collateral damage in this judgment. And Abraham cries out to God, and his expectation is that a righteous God would not judge the righteous people along with the unrighteous. So he pleads with the Lord. However, he pleads with the Lord humbly. I mean, consider throughout his intercession, he says, now that I have been bold, in verse 27, now that I have been so bold as to speak to the Lord, though I am but nothing but dust and ashes. In verse 30, he says, may the Lord not be angry, but let me speak. In verse 32, may the Lord not be angry, but let me speak just once more. Abraham, as he talks to the Lord, approaches him with humility, approaches him by accepting that he is righteous in judging. He acknowledges the character of God. He acknowledges the righteousness of God. Far be it from God to judge the righteous with the unrighteous. Will not the judge of all the earth do right? And so he pleads for mercy for the righteous consistent with God's character. If there's 50, God, will you be merciful? And God will. If there's 5 less than 50, 45, will God be merciful? Yes, he will. If there's 40, will he be merciful? Yes, he will. 30, 20, 10, the number keeps reducing. Soon, we're approaching a household size that is smaller than Lot's household. I mean, consider that the reason Lot moved to Sodom was that his household was so large that it was running into Abraham. Now, we only know of his 2 daughters, 2 sons-in-law, and wife. We only know of 6. But the people who are part of Lot's kind of household extend beyond that because there's this crowding problem with Abraham. And so even though Lot and his own people, a similar group of people to the group that Abraham circumcised last week, that group, there's not righteous people in that group. Lot has not influenced the people with which he lives. So Abraham holds two hard ideas in tension. He does want God to be merciful, but he acknowledges that God is just. And so he responds to the justice, the judgment, the righteousness of God with intercession, with a plea for mercy. Let me ask you, do you respond to God's judgment in the same way? I think when we hear of God's judgment, we have kind of two opposite temptations in how we think about God's judgment. On the one hand, there's the kind of nice guy opposition to God's judgment. Over here, we look at the fact that God is going to judge the world, and we think, whew, that's really mean. I want to serve a God of love. A God of love would never exercise judgment. He would never judge sin. He would never punish evil. That's not a loving God. I want God to be all love all the time. And we have this view of God as this giant, squishy teddy bear who you just long to hug and expect no resistance back, expect no righteousness, expect no condemnation for evil. And we diminish the holiness of God in such a way that we think that it's somehow bad for God to act consistent with his character. It's a very common view in our world today, right? That's a very common secular view of God. We live in a nation where a significant percentage of our nation believes in some form of ultimate power. But very few of them are comfortable with that ultimate power exercising justice and judgment on sin, particularly on their sin. And we like to diminish the righteousness of God. But on the other hand, there's another opposite error that unfortunately is often very important or very common in Christianity. And that's this delight in God's judgment that lacks any of his sympathy and mercy. It lacks any of his compassion. It lacks any self-awareness that if God is instantly judging in all of his fullness, I am one of those who is going to be judged. And we can't fall on either side of this continuum. We ought not be this hostile group of people, the church. We ought not be this hostile group of people who look at the world around us pointing fingers and hoping that God's judging fire follows where we're pointing, like some Marvel superhero who can call down fire from high because we're pointing at someone and identifying their sin. Yet very often we look at the sins of other people and think, God judged them righteously. And then we look in the mirror at the sins of ourselves and think, oh God, you could never possibly do something bad to me. I'm good. I'm lovable. I'm nice. Abraham, righteous Abraham, is able to stand in the middle and hold these two poles together. God is right to be just. Those who say that God ought not be just do not understand who God is. They're rejecting his character. Yet we long for the world to come to him. We long for the world to receive his mercy. We pray for it. We work for it. We give for it. We share the gospel because of it. Because we long for God's judgment to be satisfied, not in our neighbors, but in the Savior who willingly gave himself for them. And so Abraham manages to hold these two things together. How do we do with that? Are we like Abraham? Are we willing to say, God, do what is right, but God, be merciful? Do we long for God's mercy while rejoicing also in his righteousness? We must do both. We cannot choose one or the other. We cannot choose the culture warrior path that just is constantly pointing at the world outside the church, talking about how bad they are and talking about how much we want God to deal with them. nor can we be the squishy, lovable, there is no standard of righteousness crew. The church is in a unique position where we hold both of those things in tension, but both of them fully and completely true. So Abraham responds to the Lord's judgment by calling out for the Lord's mercy. Next, Sodom responds to the Lord's judgment by challenging the Lord's authority. Chapter 19. The two angels arrived at Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gateway of the city. When he saw them, he got up to meet them and bowed down with his face to the ground. He welcomes them similarly to Abraham. "My lords," he said, "please turn aside to your servant's house. You can wash your feet and spend the night and then go on your way early in the morning." "No," they answered, "we will spend the night in the square." But he insisted so strongly that they did go with him and entered his house. He prepared a meal for them, baking bread without yeast, and they ate. Before he had gone to bed, all the men from every part of the city of Sodom, both young and old, surrounded the house. They called to Lot, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us so we can have sex with them." Lot went outside to meet them and shut the door behind them and said, "No, my friends, do not do this wicked thing. Look, I have 2 daughters who have never slept with a man. Let me bring them out to you, and you can do what you like with them. But don't do anything to these men, for they have come under the protection of my roof." "Get out of our way," they replied. "This fellow came here as a foreigner, and now he wants to play the judge. We'll treat you worse than them." They kept bringing pressure on Lot and moved forward to break down the door. But the men inside reached out and pulled Lot back into the house and shut the door. Then they struck the men who were at the door of the house, young and old, with blindness so that they could not find the door. The 2 men said to Lot, "Do you have anyone else here, sons-in-law or sons or daughters, or anyone else in the city who belongs to you? Get them out of here, because we are going to destroy this place. The outcry to the Lord against his people is so great that he has sent us to destroy it." So Lot went out and spoke to his sons-in-law who were pledged to marry his daughters. He said, "Hurry, get out of this place, because the Lord is about to destroy the city." But his sons-in-law thought he was joking. So these angels come, they arrive in Sodom. Lot welcomes them into his home. They don't want to come, but I guess he is so hospitable, he basically forces them to come into his home. And while they are there, a huge group of men, young and old from the city, come to the house and call for Lot to send out these 2 men for them to, the word in Hebrew is know them, but every other time in the Bible, not every other time, but very commonly in this sort of context, it refers to sexual relationships. It's the same word as happens when Adam knows his wife and they have children. And so they're calling for these men to come out and be raped by a mob. All the men, young and old, come to attack them. They call to Lot. They want to force them on the guests. Now, some like to try and strip the homosexual elements out of this text. Say it's something that's about hospitality, or that they actually really just wanted to talk to them. They wanted to know them in that sense. That doesn't make sense in the context, particularly with the horrible thing that Lot says about taking his daughters and doing what they want with them. His daughters who they would have already known because they are part of the city there. And so it's pretty clear that's what happens. But similarly, we ought to be careful that we don't completely reduce this text just to a text on a culture war issue about homosexuality. This text had relevance before the 1970s, before the rise of the modern homosexual movement, before the influence on our society that we feel today. This text was every bit as relevant in a society that would be incredibly hostile to homosexuality as it is today. So we should not strip the homosexuality from this text, nor is this text simply a text about how we should think about gay marriage. That would be missing and twisting the text out of its context and intent if we were going to focus solely on that. This is sin, but it seems to be a part of a broader component of the wickedness of Sodom. The outcry of others about Sodom that comes to the Lord tells us that Sodom is an evil and hostile city, a culture that is hurting those around them. She was arrogant, overfed, and unconcerned. She did not help the poor and needy, Ezekiel chapter 16 says. They were haughty and did detestable things before me. Therefore I did away with them, as you have seen. That is the prophet Ezekiel recording the Lord's words about Sodom. There is a pride. There are other things beyond homosexuality happening in here. That is not to say that that is not wrong, that that's not particular illustration of how serious the sin of Sodom had gotten, but that is a part of the picture, not the whole picture. It's actually very consistent with how the Bible deals with homosexuality. Romans chapter 1 treats homosexuality not as ultimately the foundational sin, but as the fruit of a foundational sin of rejecting God. As the society rejects their Creator, eventually He turns them over to their lusts. And so homosexuality is kind of an end point in rejection of God rather than the very root of it. And here in Sodom, their detestable actions are an illustration of just how depraved their hearts were, how settled they were in their resistance to God. And that is how Sodom responds to God. They challenge His authority, they reject His created order, they do their own thing, they do not submit to Him, and they face judgment because of it. Lot's sons-in-law, men of Sodom themselves, they can't even countenance that God might judge their sin. When Lot tells them that judgment is coming, they simply laugh at him. You must be joking. Of course God's not going to judge us. That is the attitude of Sodom in general. They will do their own thing. They will go their own way without fear of the righteous wrath and justice of God. Sodom doesn't recognize what Abraham said of the chapter before. Shall not the judge of all the earth do right? They do not believe in His righteous judgment. So the question for us today is, are you persisting in rebellion against God? Abraham's response illustrates the need for us to call out for God's mercy. Sodom's response tells us, reminds us of our need to repent, to turn from our rebellion, to turn to Him. From the Garden of Eden all the way until today, part of the very nature of how mankind lives is we go our own way, we do our own thing. Sodom is an illustration of this when it is taken to its extreme, but Sodom's root problem is not any different from America's root problem. Sodom's root problem is not any different than 13th century Poland's root problem. I know nothing about 13th century Poland, but I'm just confident they had the same problem. They want to do their own thing. They want to go their own way. They have a king and a creator who has made them for a purpose, and they said, not his purpose, my purpose. And the fruit of that is the sin of Sodom. The fruit of that is the homosexuality of our culture. But Romans also says the fruit of that is disobedience to parents. The fruit of that is all manner of wickedness and evil because it comes from a heart that says, I want to do my own thing. And what God does when my heart is so set on doing my own thing and rejecting Him is in His judgment, He lets me do it. That's what He says in Romans 1, and that's what He does in Genesis 19. The description of how the men of Sodom are acting, it almost reminds me of a zombie movie. Like these mindless men pressing to beat down the door, struck with blindness, but now just clawing out in the darkness, trying to fulfill their lusts. Almost brainless, mindless, as they head to their own destruction. Because God allows us to reject Him for a time. But one day every knee will bow, every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord to the glory of God the Father. So maybe you are in here this morning and you are like those of Sodom, rejecting the Lord. God is judge of all the earth, and he will do right. Now, it is unlikely that two angels are going to come and destroy the city of Milwaukee this evening. And I'm not predicting that it's going to happen. I'm not guaranteeing it won't happen, but it seems unlikely. Yet, judgment and justice will come. Do not wait. Do not hold on to your rebellious pride, your desire to go your own way and do your own thing. Let it go and turn to the King, Christ, who in his righteousness has stood in your place, but calls you to worship him, to acknowledge that he is the Lord, that he is the King, to love him, to allow his righteousness to be credited to your account. God is judge of all the earth. And there may be some in here who, as they read this story, should identify with Abraham and how they view the righteousness of God in the culture around them. But there may be some in here this morning who are more like Sodom than anyone else in this story. Maybe not in the sense that you're beating down people's doors as part of a rape mob, but in the sense that you are set on going your own way. The third category, the third group that responds is Lot. Lot clings to the Lord's enemies. In the New Testament, we learn more about Lot. In 2 Peter chapter 2, we have a very confusing passage. For if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but sent them to hell, putting them in chains of darkness to be held for judgment, if he did not spare the ancient world when he brought the flood on its ungodly people, but protected Noah, a preacher of righteousness, and 7 others, if he condemned the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah by burning them to ashes and made them an example of what is going to happen to the ungodly, if he rescued Lot, a righteous man who was distressed by the depraved conduct of the lawless, for that righteous man living among them day after day was tormented in his righteous soul by the lawless deeds he saw and heard. If this is so, then the Lord knows how to rescue the godly from trials and to hold the unrighteous for the punishment on the day of judgment. This verse tells us some things about Lot that you would not take away from Genesis 18 and 19. It tells us that Lot was righteous. Tells us that Lot was distressed by the sin of Sodom. If you read this account, it almost seems like Lot is the good guy in the story. But if you read the Old Testament account, it looks different. Lot utterly fails, yet Lot is a believer. Lot completely drops the ball here. From beginning to end, we see the failure of Lot, yet Lot is someone who has faith. That ought to strike alarm bells for us in this room today. That simply because I have faith, and the fact that you're here at church is an indicator that most of us probably are believers in Jesus, are believers in the Lord of Abraham. That is not a reason for us to decide we have it all together. See, Lot cannot convince his sons-in-law to leave. Verse 14 tells him to hurry. They think he's joking. Lot himself needs to be dragged away from the city. God warns him that it's going to be destroyed, that destruction's going to rain down, literal fire and brimstone raining from above. And verse 15, with the coming of the dawn, the angels urged Lot, saying, "Hurry, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, or you will be swept away when the city is punished." When he hesitated, the men grasped his hand in the hands of his wife and of his 2 daughters and led them safely out of the city, for the Lord was merciful to them. As soon as they had brought them out, one of them said, "Flee for your lives, don't look back, don't stop anywhere in the plain, flee to the mountains or you will be swept away." They are literally dragged out of the city that God is in the process of destroying. They love the world in which they live. They love the city of the plain. They love the green. They love the beauty of Sodom. And because of that, they need to be dragged out when their very lives were in danger, when they would certainly be destroyed. They're dragged out, and then you have this interesting exchange between Lot and the angels. In chapter 19, verses 18 through 21, you have another exchange between them. But Lot said to them, "No, my lords, please, your servant has found favor in your eyes, and you have shown great kindness to me in sparing my life, but I can't flee to the mountains. The disaster will overtake me, and I'll die. Look, here is a town near enough to run to. It's small. Let me flee to it. It is very small, isn't it? Then my life will be spared." He said to him, "Very well, I will grant this request too. I will not overthrow the town you speak of, but flee here quickly, because I cannot do anything until you reach it." That is why the town was called Zoar. So Lot's leaving, and it's like, "No, God, I really need to be in at least a city of some sort. I have to be by the world. I went there, I became a part of it, I loved it. You've shown that it's unrighteous, you're going to destroy it, but please don't take me so far away. Let me stop at Zoar." Not only that, verse 23, rather. By the time Lot reached Zoar, the sun had risen over the land. Then the Lord rained down burning sulfur on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of the heavens. Thus he overthrew those cities and the entire plain, destroying all those living in the cities and also the vegetation in the land. But Lot's wife looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. Lot's wife looks back with longing in her heart for Sodom, which she has left behind. She has turned into a pillar of salt. Well, Abraham is going to have children come from him who are going to worship and one day bless all nations. Lot's family is just like Sodom. His son-in-laws won't come with him. His wife turns back. He himself even turns back. Verse 27, early the next morning, Abraham got up and returned to the place where he had stood before the Lord. He looked down toward Sodom and Gomorrah. Pardon me, this is Abraham, not Lot. Toward all the land of the plain, and saw dense smoke rising from the land like smoke from a furnace. Lot's failure doesn't end here. Verse number 30 through 38 tells a horrible story. Lot and his two daughters left Zoar and settled in the mountains. They ended up in the mountains anyway. For he was afraid to stay in Zoar. He and his two daughters lived in a cave. One day, the older daughter said to the younger, "Our father is old. There's no man around here to give us children, as is the custom all over the earth. Let's get our father to drink wine and then sleep with him and preserve our family line through our father." That night, they got their father to drink wine. The older daughter went in and slept with him. He was not aware of it when she lay down or when she got up. The next day, the older daughter said to the younger, "Last night I slept with my father. Let's get him to drink wine again tonight. You go in and sleep with him so we can preserve our family line through our father." So they got their father to drink wine that night also. The younger daughter went in and slept with him. Again, he was not aware of it when she lay down and when she got up. So both of Lot's daughters became pregnant by their father. The older daughter had a son. She named him Moab. He is the father of the Moabites of today. The younger daughter also had a son. She named him Ben-Ami. He is the father of the Ammonites of today. And so Lot loses everything. Loses his family, this horrible, dark account of something gross and wicked and evil. Because Lot gave his loyalty to someone other than the Lord. He was righteous. He was a believer. He received blessings from God, but it wasn't enough because the world tugged at his loyalty. Does the world tug at your loyalty like it tugged at Lot's? He's a believer who's rescued from divine judgment. I presume that most of us here are. He's a believer who's distressed by sin. I would imagine that most of us here are as well. But he is a believer who is attached and attracted to the world and the evil of that world. And he loves it, and he will not let it go. Now, Lot does not receive the judgment of Sodom. He is rescued. Because of Abraham's faith, because of his faith, he is delivered from Sodom. Yet I don't think any of us look to Lot and think, I want my life to go the way his life went. I want to follow that path. No, Lot is a great example of how one can be a believer, yet live in persistent rebellion against God and face serious consequences while still being a believer. How does the world tug at your loyalty? How does the world pull at your loyalty? It tells you this is something that's better than what Jesus offers. This is something better than what he calls you to. Whether it's prosperity, the esteem of other people, physical pleasure, comfort, you name it, the world offers so much to us, and it's so attractive, like Lot several chapters before, looking at the cities of the plain and seeing that it was good land. We look at the cities around us, we look at the world in which we live, and instead of like Abraham calling out in compassion for God's righteousness, but also his mercy on those cities, we say, let me move in. Let me live in that world. I'm going to have some loyalty to Jesus, but I'm also going to have some loyalty to the esteem of the world. I'm going to have some loyalty to Jesus, but I'm also going to hold some loyalty to the stuff of this world. I'm going to have loyalty to Jesus, but I'm also going to have loyalty to all that is around me. And like Lot, we're torn in two. We never truly experience what God would call us to. We may have ultimately salvation, but the life we lead is not a life that is honorable or good. So we see in this text three different characters responding to the Lord as king, as judge. Abraham sees God's righteous judgment and pleads for mercy. Sodom sees God's righteousness and utterly rejects it and goes their own way. Lot sees God's righteousness and says, give me a little bit of that and a little bit of this. The reality is, most of us here are probably sitting there in that third category. There are things in this world that while we would express our loyalty with our mouth, our heart expresses loyalty to those things. And we pursue those things instead of God. And it's not always the spectacular and the scandalous like this story. It's the time when I'm just sitting, relaxing, and my children are annoying me, and I'm short with them. Because I'm selfish, because I love my comfort, I love my relaxation much more than I love the Lord who calls me to raise them well. When I speak to my wife unkindly, because I'm too proud to admit that she's right and I'm wrong, that's that same pull. I want a little bit of Jesus and a little bit of the world. The end of that is not good. Not going to lose your salvation. Lot is righteous, but Lot's not happy. Lot's not happy. Lot is sorrowful. So I ask you this morning, which one of these characters are you? And does the Lord have your absolute loyalty? Let's pray. Lord, I pray that you would help us this morning to apply this well. I pray that you would encourage us to have our loyalty to you and you alone when the world is calling to us, when it seems like what is good is what you have said no to. I pray that we would trust that you truly are good and righteous altogether. I pray, God, that we would have compassion on the world around us rather than looking down on them in judgment, that we would follow Abraham's example. And Lord, I pray that if there's anyone here who's living in Sodom right now with their loyalty completely opposed to you, that they would recognize that your righteous judgment is coming, but your mercy is offered, and that they would turn to you. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.